welcome back to another episode of
Just
a
a
Squirrel
squirrel
looking
for
a
a nut, trying to
get
get
out
of
this
rut. Huh. This was better than last week, but let's face it, we couldn't sink much lower than that. This time, I would say we're 98% there. If let's say this was a photograph, this is one that we took with a high def, really nice camera that we got at a collector's store, or for people who know what they're talking about. It wasn't quite art, but at least we left with our dignity intact. How are you, Oleg?
For artistic performance, we definitely got an A+. Do you agree?
Well, for effort.
Yeah.
Why is it so quiet in here tonight, Oleg? There's got to be more people in the house.
There are two others. I figured that, should we introduce the two other squirrel companion fellow co-hosts?
Yeah, baby, let's do it.
There they are.
Who are these people? I don't know you people. What are you doing on my screen?
Great to be here.
Oleg, why don't you do one? I'll do the other.
Well, one of the ones that I know of personally is Casey Berman here that you're able to see on the screen. He has become a co-host as part of this show, and so he's able to share the space with us. In fact, it would be kind of interesting maybe one day to even do the introduction with more people, just to see how much more we can not mess it up, but how much more art form we can add to the
I was gonna say if I'm there, I'm gonna mess it up. But yeah.
Don't worry, I'm better at it than anybody. I think that is not just something you're thinking about. I think that that's something that's gonna happen. Now, we might not do it in the immediate future, but you never know what the future holds with regards to Richard Cook. Richard Cook is our very special guest tonight. Richard Cook is a renowned photographer. He is originally from the Netherlands. He is brilliant. We have listed the link to his Instagram site in the comments on all of the different platforms that this is airing on. I urge anyone who is watching this show or listening to it to take a look. You will be blown away. And I will tell you unequivocally that when you see that, when you learn a little bit about Richard, as you have and you will tonight, if you looked at that Instagram, and you will if you listen to him or watch him tonight, you'll understand why he is the perfect person to talk to us about art. Richard, what's doing, brother?
That is quite the introduction.
God. Exactly. You had no idea how uncomfortable that made me feel. So yeah, I'm so definitely not a specialist on art, but I can only say how I do my thing, and I hope that that's enjoyable to hear. That's it. I can only share my own thing. Yeah.
Well, one other thing that I will say before we get into it is that Richard has been a regular participant in the audience in the show, and we're happy to have him here. And whoa, look who just walked into the house. It is Miss Thing herself, Michelle Griffin. She is a brilliant brand strategist. I have been working with her on my brand strategy myself, so I will personally endorse her. She is awesome. Michelle, welcome to the house tonight. It is so good to see. And homegirl Melody is here. Melody, Michelle, give us your thoughts as we go forward tonight. We want to hear from you. In fact, every word that you type in might just end up inspiring some art. Richard, you said a minute ago that you're just doing your own thing and you don't know anything about art. I'm just doing my own thing every day. I just decided to put some relaxer in my hair a couple of weeks ago, stick some gel in. I was walking around and some of it was sticking out here and some of it was sort of tall. Some of it was just looking kind of crazy. Was that art? I didn't know what I was doing. How do we even know whether what you do with what is the difference between some photographs that I might be taking of my skanky ass looking hair and the stuff that you put together that's being sold around the world?
That's a good question, Scott. Poof, here you go. The only thing I can say is you might be making art, but you don't even know that you're doing it. So yeah. So basically, for me, actually, I just wanted to say that about my motivations of doing what I'm doing, which is taking photographs, is that the less I think about it, the better it works for my creativity. The more I start to try to explain what I'm doing, I'm kind of like basically bringing it all down and spend my energy on things that I should not be spending on. I should just take pictures that I think are beautiful. And then actually I hear the most from the people who are viewing my art. So basically I learn from how people connect to my work, and like you said, you say it's art, then I'm thinking, great. I'm very glad that you think it's art, and I just do what I have to do. That's kind of like how I work, and that's how I connect with my work.
Yeah. So in that case, Richard, then is everything art, and is it just a matter of perspective of you viewing it as art to begin with?
Yeah, these are all labels. It's like, when is something art? It's the same as like, what is love? Those are like these cosmic definitions that are like, you cannot really define it. So I actually, before logging in, I actually like typed in on YouTube, what is art? And it's like, you get an avalanche of little videos that describe what is art. And there was one person who like basically like put on quotes from all famous people of the history of man, and it's like as crazy as it can get, as diverse as it can get. Art, it is like, the Oxford definition is poorly. It's all that they talk about beauty. Yeah, basically, yeah. If you think it's art, then to me, good for you. Then it's art.
But you consider yourself an artist, and I'm assuming that based on what Melody put in the comments, that she considers herself an artist too, albeit in a different medium.
Exactly.
What makes you self-define as an artist?
Creativity. That's kind of like the I used to be a lawyer. Let me start with that.
Whoa.
I used to work in an office 9 to 5.
No, seriously, stop.
Oh, you didn't know that? Oh, yeah.
You and Casey need to talk. Seriously, you may be a case study that changes Casey's life, because Casey's company is called Leave Law Behind. It's helping people get out of law.
I left it behind many years ago. Good
for you.
But the interesting thing is, every Monday morning, if I would go to the office, I should have studied all the jurisprudence that came out in the last week. I should have like been ready to like be able to answer and to find solutions to all, and I was a specialist in fiscal law, taxes. And basically, I had like no clue what I was doing. I was there. I was at a good firm, and I saw my coworkers loving what they were doing. I saw how they were actually using that jurisprudence, put it into a big bag, and created something that would help their clients. I saw them actually being creative with law, and that's when I realized, actually, after I quit my job, that no, creativity doesn't have to limit to painting or making pictures. You can actually be creative in whatever. You can cook up a good meal and be creative and be the creative self. So yeah, that's basically for me. Everybody can be an artist. Absolutely. Yeah.
Casey, when you were working for the tech firm that you were a lawyer at, did you feel like an artist? Did you feel creative?
No, that's why I left. I felt like I was just putting out fires. I didn't feel creative. There were a few elements, but I didn't feel creative at all.
Melody says that what you do needs to feed your soul. So I'm hearing that doing that in-house counsel work or that tax work wasn't filling your soul. Not at all. And
when Richard, you mentioned art, because I'm not an artist in sort of the conventional sense that we talk about here in in the world or in America in 2021, whatever year we're in now. And I think so. Then, what makes something art? For me, Richard, what you said really stood out was it's about you, and it's hard. I think it's so hard to define what art is because we're using words, and words are inexact. Scott, we talked about this, but if words were so exact, why do we need a thesaurus? Why do we need synonyms? And it's creative. You use different words, but the world is very vibrational. And so I think that what makes something art, first of all, you don't want to think about it. You just want to do it, like Richard said. Second of all, you don't want to do it for other people. You want to do it for yourself. And then where I really see art is as communication. You're telling something. Now, it needs to be made accessible, because art, just like the tree that falls in the forest, I'll answer the question. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, did it fall? Did it make a sound? No, because there's no eardrum. There's no drum to take on the vibrations. And so, when you look at Richard's art, and when it speaks to you, when you feel it, even if you can't put it into words, that's because the vibration happened. Something transferred. It's invisible, but something transferred from the image, from what he put together, that creativity. And the other thing that comes to me, and then I'll get off my soapbox, but is that, what makes an artist? It's easy for all of us, like Scott and you wrote, to have a doodle or to think creative things or to think of some beautiful thing in our mind. But in the same way, there's only a few sages in the past who've come out of the desert and have brought enlightenment and brought the ideas to people. That's really what makes an artist different than everyone else who doodles, is they put the work into it. Art comes from the Latin skill. There's work there. And so I think that that's really the difference of what art is that it's communication that's accessible. And I think an artist is the one who quits their job, makes themselves vulnerable, probably goes against conventional wisdom, probably disappoints his mom and dad for being an artist, and literally comes back from the spiritual and can translate this onto a canvas. You know how hard that is to translate the ephemeral onto a piece of photo paper, on a piece of a canvas, into melodies and vibrations. I'm in awe of artists, not because it speaks to me, but also because of just all the grit and courage it takes to bring it back.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I will build off of, as far as what all of you have shared this far, and the reason why I even asked that question of Richard to begin with, what makes art, and is anything art, and does it really just boil down to it being a matter of perspective, is because I remember when I was younger and I used to go to museums, different museums in different cities that we would go in with my parents on high school spring trips and the trips before that. In fact, I remember one of the museums we went to in New York City, Scott, I shared this with you the other day, Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Yep.
I think one of them. And at that age, I remember walking around and looking at different paintings and sculptures and having a hard time understanding what about this particular figure makes it an art form. And it wasn't until later on that I realized that what made it an art form was the feeling that I was able to experience between the two. And I think that feeling came from having had some form of experience of my own, where I was able to understand, what does it actually mean to be creative? See, I think the other thing, and Casey, you hit the nail on the head. I think that there is creativity, at least in my opinion, it doesn't have a boundary. It doesn't mean that it has to stay in the box. Some creativity, I've seen some of the most creative finger paintings I've ever seen in my life, done by 4 and 5 and 6 years olds. So I think there's beauty within that. And I guess what I will say, as far as how I define art, is it's a feeling that I experience between whatever that thing is, whether it's a sculpture or a painting or a canvas, whatever that final outcome is. And I guess for me, the other part of that question is, if that feeling's not there, it's that much harder for me to understand what is the artistic element of it, or maybe even understanding the journey that it took for that person to develop that particular piece. Some people it takes whatever the time frame. Some people work, I know from personal experience, a handful of people that work on one particular piece for 20 years, 30 years. And so being able to experience that, there's something fascinating, at least to me, and I don't know if Richard can speak to this experience as well, how long it takes to probably produce some of those pictures sometimes,
Right.
especially before the quote unquote digital world that we're experiencing now. Back then when you had to use film, and find a dark room, and depending on where you are in the world, it's not always as accessible as it might be in places like New York City and San Francisco and other parts of the US.
True,
So
true.
it's just
Although
fascinating to see the journey.
Absolutely true. Although I chose photography simply because I'm way too impatient. I tried actually painting first, and it took over a week for some oil to dry, and I was like, this is not what I'm looking for. This is going nowhere. And photography basically fit my personality best. I'm an impatient man. I need results right away. And even if it was film, you still had the Polaroid that you held on to see what it was. And now it's digital, and now it's it's an instant meal at the moment. And I did very much like what you said, Oleg. Being in a museum and looking at art, and I had a nice anecdote actually. In 2018, I was in on an art fair, and my gallery, a gallery represented my work in Amsterdam. I was there on a fair, and he had some of my work of my New York City street life framed in, and it was hanging in his booth. And every time, and so I'm like there at the opening, and it was a weekend, so people pass by, look at my work, and actually I loved to be a fly on the wall. I didn't say that I was the maker, so I wanted to hear what they were saying. And so I think 70% of the comments was about how they love New York, and how, oh, that is the Oculus. I haven't been there yet, so I wanted to go there. And the moment I started to say I'm the photographer, they went on with like, yeah, we still want to go to the Oculus. And I was like, what the F? Like, what am I here, a tour guide? Like, that was the first thing that came up in my mind. And now I realize that I'm still learning stuff, because my gallery, I said to my gallery owner, I feel like a freaking tour guide of New York City, that people are like asking me questions about New York. And when they're looking at my pictures, and he looked at me and he said, isn't that great? And I was like, what do you mean? People connect with your work. It doesn't matter how they connect with it, they connect with your work. So you hold their attention, and they're digging into your work. And that's the moment that for him, that is a moment where he can sell something if people connect with it. And that's the same with you, Oleg said. Sometimes you don't even have to understand why things are made, what you see, what is the analysis of that maker. Sometimes you don't have to understand art in order to appreciate it. You only have to connect with it in some very deep emotional or feeling level. And that's when you succeed as an artist, when you make that connection. That's yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Let's say I decided I wanted to become a visual artist. I won't be as ambitious at all as trying to do what Melody does, writing a book. Melody, I don't even know how you do this. And I won't lie, Richard, even waiting for a piece of photography to look halfway decent is more than my little leather suspended self can handle. But let's say I decided to somehow get over my challenges and do this. And I put together what my piece of art might be. It would probably be a copycat sketch of, let's say, 2.5 men's stars on a commemorative plate that I sell in the back of some cheap magazine that you see at the dentist's office. And let's say I decide to put one of those plates up in an art museum or in a gallery. Boom, it's right up there for everyone to see. And what if everyone roundly ignores it? And so I get a little bit indignant about that, because I got an ego. So I decide to, being that I'm immortal based on a discussion that we had a couple of weeks ago, I decide to go to every single person in the world and show them my art and every last person is indifferent. Every last person is like, that don't speak to me. Is that plate even conceivably art?
Well, doesn't it speak to you though? I feel like as an artist, at least my opinion of it, being in a not necessarily the same path that Richard or anyone else that might be in as far as producing photographs or paintings, but being an entrepreneur, I think that's a form of an artist. At least that's one of the paths. That's how I perceive it, at least from my opinion. So I think in your situation, Scott, what it makes me think of is why is external validation needed in that case, where if art is solely an expression made by the artist, I think external validation, at least for me, doesn't justify whether or not that particular thing is an art form. That's how I understand it, at least.
Melody points out, well, she feels that art is to feed the soul, Scott, not the ego. Dang, I was gonna do those plays so I could get famous. Melody, you weren't supposed to call me out like that. Richard and Casey, come on, you gotta save me here.
Yeah, I really believe if Scott, if you spoke your truth through your art, whether anybody appreciates it or not, and there's art that nobody appreciates, but as long as it's truthful, I still like. But we're talking about labels here. But then basically, art needs to be truthful. If you would do it in order to be famous, in order to to gain something else, if you have another agenda when it comes to like what you make, then I would question your work. But if it's something that hits me, or if it's something that has hit you, like Oleg is referring to, if it's basically something that connects with yourself and whatever story you carry, then voila. Mm-hmm. It's for me, it's totally independent from who appreciates the work, whether it's that's kind of like my definition. And absolutely, it should not feed the ego. Although it's very difficult for an artist to. I think it was Elizabeth Gilmore in her TED talk. She talks about artists, how basically she has this wonderful talk about art because she wrote that book Eat, Pray, Love, and she basically explains how do you follow up on a success like that if that's your first book that you published. And she basically tries to explain how art originated and how she deals with her success. And one of the things that she said was, when the Renaissance came in place in history, suddenly art was owned by the artists. And before that, in the medieval times, art was a divine concept that was given to you by a divine power. And so when you were suddenly not inspirational anymore, that higher power basically took away what had been given, and you're stripped of it. But nobody blamed you for the fact that you couldn't create anymore. But after the Renaissance, it became an ego thing. It became artists owned their art. Artists were responsible for what they made. And that's basically what she said. That's when shit happens. Shit hit the fan. Because that's when artists start to drink themselves to death or do drugs or whatever to deal with the burden of making something that needs to be, out there. And no, it can be taken away. So I love her. I actually love the old concept of art. It's something that is given to me. I can use it. When it's gone, it'll be gone. But, it's not up to me to decide that.
Yeah. I look at art as a process. And so it's a creative communication. Like I said, you're expressing yourself. So in Scott, in your example, you're expressing yourself through the plate, but it may be, to what Melody was saying, what you're expressing is, I want to make some money off this. I want this quick. And people get that communication. They see it, they get it. And they either have fun with it and they buy it, or it's kitschy, or it's exclusive, or they turn their eye and say, this guy's just trying to make a buck. I get it. I see it. So is it art? Well, depends how creative the expression is on it. When it's late at night and the kids aren't around, I watch Family Guy and I laugh. I don't tell it. You're not recording this, right? It's not live. I don't tell anyone.
Of course not.
It's forever.
It's forever. So that's an expression. It's kind of creative. Is it art? But we can debate all we want on the levers you pull on whether it's creative or not, and that's just something fun to have, and it'll go on in perpetuity. But I think there's a real important part about what the source of it is, and so when you think about the inspiration and why you're doing it, it's really a process. And so, to Oleg's point about where people could do it for 20 years, or for people in the 1200s, or those unnamed pictures that you see that are worth a lot, that you see in the museums, but they're unnamed. The people are doing this to a lot of that is Jesus, and I mean that's coming from their soul and what they believe in. Think of the 40,000 years ago in the cave paintings in France, right? Obviously, they didn't really have capitalism back then and to sell something, but the goal there was that hand on the wall. Here I am here. I mean, that's literally what that hand is. And if you look at the expression of when they drew the animals that were around in the field, those beautiful paintings in France. I mean, what are they telling us with that? Could be art. It could be decorations. It could be inspirational. It could have just been a calculator. Here's how many animals we saw or we killed. Who knows?
Right.
But there is some creative, and assuming we view it as art, we won't know, but assuming we view it as art. But for me, it's the process of it, which is why even if an artist, their paintings come out later and we don't see the paintings during the artist's lifetime, just knowing that they did it for the sake of it. Now, you then say, well, how does Richard make money? He's got to pay rent. He's got a new one coming, I heard, so you need already here. Congratulations. Congrats.
The process has already started.
It already started. And I think, unfortunately, we equate, and I'm taking this on a tangent, but that's what we're here for. But I feel like art gets a bad name because we associate money with negativity. Mm-hmm. And we can go down money and beliefs in money and so on. But I think money's a beautiful thing. It's oxygen, it's energy. It's not our master. We should be the master of money. But so you can still make art and do it for the sake of it. That doesn't make selling it mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. It's your expression. It's how you communicate. It's what you want to say about the world. And if people want to pay money to have that expression more accessible to them, I say by all means.
Right.
Well, I think the other thing that I'll add on to what Casey just said is, at least what I've heard, maybe a slight build-up, slight tangent off of what you were talking about, Casey. It's that I've heard that art is not monetary as far as the career goes. And that's one of the things that I've observed throughout my life. I've known people, I've known friends who are artists or who were artists, and then ended up giving that as a possible quote unquote career option, because starting off, I believe this is probably true for most careers, they didn't make money. So the people that they were surrounded with, as far as the quote unquote supporters, didn't understand the process that it takes to be able to turn that into career, or have it transition from a hobby or a career, whichever way you want to label that. But I think that's one of the other things that I've observed as an outsider, is that it's one of those paths that doesn't have an immediate, or not always. I can't speak for everyone. I'm sure that there are people who have been able to figure it out in the first 24 hours. Others, it might have taken however many years. But I think that's kind of true of life. I think that's true of entrepreneurship. I mean, we were talking about this last week or maybe the week before. The challenge of actually being an entrepreneur, being able to start from idea which I think is very similar to whatever the art form we talk about, and then manifest that into a tangible form that we can communicate that message through to someone who may or may not be familiar with the concept to begin with.
But that's
Right.
but that's only because of the matrix we live in that art isn't.
Correct.
That's not an objective truth. That's just because of the system we live in.
Yeah, that's the truth we choose.
That's right.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd like to first comment on the handprint in the cave. Like you said, here I am, but how did you don't know what what the caveman was thinking? Maybe it was like, oh, whoop, oh shoot, I dirtied the wall, like so.
He was drunk.
That kind of like proves that over time things can become art because of the span of time. Like I totally believe that the first photographers who started to those were like people who could afford working with those silver plates and with the chemicals. They were often fortunate men who were like doing that. I don't think they were like being artists. They were actually trying to like make something work. But however, those first photographs are now like the ultimate of photography art. But the intention probably wasn't there. But so time can also make things artful, simply because of the value, and the process that it beholds.
Mhm.
Taken the history of it.
Can something, though, have all of the characteristics of art and yet not be art? I'm going to use as an example a contrast here. Let's talk about Danielle Steele or Stephen King or writers like that. And Melody, you may have insight about this too. They may be speaking their truth, but there is no subtlety in what they do. They are derivative, especially from what I've read. I haven't read anything by myself, so I'm just relying on reviews here, especially Danielle Steele. But even Stephen King, it would be hard to see him by anyone that studies literature that I've ever met as an artist of the letters. They are putting their heart and their soul into these. At least I hope they are, but maybe they aren't. But I would say at least arguably Stephen King is. And yet no one would put him on par with Toni Morrison. And in fact, I bet a lot of people, if you said, these are the books of Toni Morrison, this is art. These are the books of Stephen King. People might say Stephen King or Danielle Steele are masters of a craft, but are they artists? Whereas Toni Morrison, almost no one would say is not a true artist. And her books, especially the high mark ones at the height of her career, no one in their right mind would say that they are anything but art. You may not like them as art, but any and everyone would acknowledge them as such. So is the exercise of craftsmanship art? If you're a craftsman or craftswoman, are you an artist? Melody says yes, if they have a style. But I don't even understand what a style is. And I'm not saying that dismissively, Melody. I really actually would like to know what that means, because I don't really understand that in particular. And that's my own deficit as someone who's stylistically challenged.
Oof.
Well, wouldn't that? I feel like I'm taking over Casey's role here for doing the agree to disagree with Scott here. But based on what you just shared, Scott, wouldn't that? I'm just trying to think of from the perspective of what Richard was talking about earlier, and that's art is something that has its own style and really can't be defined, so to speak, because whatever might appear as art to you may not appear as art to me. And I think it's okay to experience that. And I think in regard to the books, I also wonder how much of an influence does, let's say, the larger field of literature have on defining whether something is considered to be an art form or not, or because there's so many variables, especially I think in today's day and age. I don't know how it was evaluated, let's say 15, 20 years ago, but now, is every New York Times bestseller considered to be the best thing on the face of the earth, or did some of those people get there through a different way? Because there's also a way that you can become a quote unquote famous author, famous artist, famous whatever, by paying your way through certain things. So I don't know if it's always, I think there is like hard work, don't get me wrong, that goes into that. I think there's hard work that comes into earning the money to be able to pay for some of these channels to amplify your work or your platform. But I'm curious, as far as there's so many different ways to get to the top, so to speak, where it's hard to evaluate or understand, well, whose was the most artistic approach to get to that particular standard.
Yeah, but I gotta say something to that, my brother, and that is that if art is undefinable, then why do we even have a word for it? Why would we as a species just come up with a word for something that had no definition? Surely there must be parameters around what's art or not, or we would never have come up with it conceptually in the first place.
Well, I have to say something about it, because you talk about good art. You talk about art. Yeah, I do think it's kind of like the snobbish way, because I think you will piss off a lot of Stephen King fans when you say things like that. And
yeah, you might have just dropped our show from the air with that comment.
So you've heard of James Patterson, right? That's the guy who always writes with somebody else. I actually portraited him in his house in Florida for Stern magazine. So we went into his workroom, and there were literally 5 projects. No, 5. There were actually more than 5. There were like 10 covers with different writers that he was working on at the same time, simultaneously. So basically, those were the books that he was producing. He basically has a second writer, and so it's the same as Jeff Koons, who runs a studio, but he doesn't make his own artwork. I actually visited Kehinde Wiley's office once. That is the painter who portraited Barack Obama. That's now in the National Portrait Gallery. That famous painting of Barack now. I went to a studio, and there were I don't know how many people working on all the leaves. They were painting the leaves, and the only thing that Kehinde was touching up was the face, So, and it's the same as it's art is this grand label, and there's so much you can put on it, and there's so much you can discuss about it. I still think Jeff Koons makes beautiful art, even if he has other people making it. What is it? What was at the gates at Central Park? Those orange, that beautiful. It's an art piece, but it's pure an idea that's been constructed by somebody else. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much that you can discuss about, the quality of art if you make it yourself, the craftsmanship. There's so many aspects of art that that you can discuss, and there's for everything that you say, there's something that I could say that would show the opposite. I believe. Yeah, I find it difficult, but I like to get back to what Casey says about the process and about connecting that art does. So another thing that I want to say, art is useless. Have you ever heard of that? Art is useless. That's a very famous phrase from Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde said, "Art is useless." In the beginning, I would become mad if I heard that. I was like, "Art is not useless because it does this, it does that." But if I start to read into it a little bit, art is useless. Actually, the most purest art is useless. What we need is electricity. That's useful. There's a lot of things we need, but real art. The purpose of real art is what Oscar Wilde says, is like a flower. It's there, it's beautiful, it's for us to enjoy, to watch it, but it doesn't have to have a function. And so that is actually the most purest art form. And that's why it's kind of independent from what other people think of it. Art is just is. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of I love that idea of I'm going to make art. But when you talk about money, about, trying to pay the rent in New York City, yes, there is entrepreneurship. Art is a business living in New York City. My art is a business. However, me making the art, me being on the streets, waiting for that moment, being totally in sync with what's going on around me, the people, the atmosphere, the backdrop, the light. I'm like, suddenly I get in this state that is totally out of me, and I make the most beautiful pictures at that moment. So basically, that's a useless thing. It's basically I connect and I do something, and that's it. And then I put it on Facebook, and then I put it on Instagram, and then I make a print, and then I make a book, and then it becomes something else. It becomes useful, but it starts out absolutely useless.
Melody has two comments that are germane to this. One, at 7:53, she said it's a flow, which I think is what you were talking about a few minutes ago when you were going into a little bit of detail about your process. She also respectfully disagrees that it's useless. She says that it, and by the way, we love to disagree here. Like mentioned earlier, Casey and I have gone out afterwards and beat each other up, and then we haven't been able to do our show the next day because there's bruises on all over our face and we've lost our teeth. But that's a different discussion that we'll have about fighting. She says that art feeds the soul and that it's not useless. What do y'all think about that? Casey, since you're arguing with me all the time, why don't you just say something?
Yeah, jump in because I'm on my last fumes.
Oleg was doing great arguing with you there. I think that the issue with this question is that art is fluid and always changing. It's like grasping air, grasping water, and we want to answer this question: what makes something art? And that then begs the question of why do we need to answer the question? And do we need an answer for this? But, as far as feeding the soul, I think art is useless if we view the sitting around and is laying on the grass and staring up at the clouds useless? Is taking a nap useless? I think we view this in America in 2021 in a very capitalist, productive, hyper-efficient lens. And really, art is none of that. Maybe Scott's plate in the tourist store is, and it's produced that way. And, we're seeing art being produced by, Richard, you mentioned the folks. Why is it wrong that he has other people creating it or helping it, right? Why does the artist himself, him or herself, need to be the one with the paintbrush? But I do, does it feed the soul? I think so. I think if you look at where you have intellect, or you have the feeling or the intellect, right? Scott, we talked about this, we live in a Cartesian world. Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, right? And so we talked about this, Scott, on the podcast, which was, if I think, therefore I am, but that says nothing about feeling. What about if I feel, therefore I am? And we don't think that way in our world now. Maybe we will in 1,000 years or on a different planet, but we're about, I think, therefore I am. So that's why we have productivity apps. That's why we have Monday.com and Salesforce and CRM and all this, because we think it'll make us better. And it does make us better intellectually. It makes us more productive. It gets us across the finish line and all of that. But where I think art is almost like a spy. Art is sort of a relic. Art is this spaceship that landed on this earth. And we're looking at it like, art's not a CRM. It doesn't make me more productive. Mm-hmm. What is it doing here? Art is Stonehenge. Like, we just don't know why they built Stonehenge. But who cares? Who cares why they built Stonehenge? Like, the hand on the wall, that's my interpretation. Actually, I took it from someone else. It's not even mine. And that sounds pretty cool, right? This cavewoman saying, here I am. But like you said, Richard, they might have tripped.
Yeah, literally.
I like the drunken caveman better. That's
yeah, right? But art is strange. Art doesn't belong here because the soul, we've kind of eradicated the soul. In the same way we've gotten rid of the grass and we have concrete, the same way we have to replant, the same way we landscape. In San Francisco, a lot of us have gone to native grass landscapes because it saves water, but also this is what it grows here. Why do you have palm trees and roses if they're just not meant to grow here, right? So for me, does art feed the soul? It does. And that's so strange to us. And I think it's so strange to us because we have almost kind of locked our soul in a prison in this world. Mm-hmm. And when you have these little relics of the art left over, we don't know what to do with it. We don't know what to do with Richard. So what do? We turn his work into a tour guide, or like this, like that, because it's the only frame, not the only, some of the frames that a lot of people have, and it's not their problem. But Richard, when he's got that picture of the girl on his site with the eyes and the green, the lighting and all the process that came to it, it's almost, I think we're having this question because we humans in our world and our programming, we don't even know what to do with art. Art's the third child. Art's like my son and my daughter, both of them, who've given a middle finger to the world since they were born, who don't fit here, who are thriving, but with a lot of work, who are courageous, and who just say that art essentially says the emperor has no clothes, and wonders why we all don't go along with it immediately. So,
but it's really interesting what you say, Casey, because name 10 famous industrialists from the 19th century.
Rockefeller.
The 19th century.
Oh, 19th century.
However, we do know artists from the 19th century. So art lives way longer than any other thing. Artists are, like the way I look at New York City is basically built up by the movies that I saw of New York, the TV shows, everything that makes me feel comfortable in New York is actually built up by moving images, the art of the moving image. That's my collective memory, and I bring that with me. And that's how we actually look at history. It's not the Pope that got famous in that Velasquez painting. It's Velasquez who made that Pope famous. He made the Pope live for longer than his life, not the actions of that Pope. And so I do believe that art, although what you just say, it's definitely underrated when it comes to like the general population. However, art is our memory, kind of like. That's the way we like basically value the past. It's through the images, through the words from writers. And then my next question is: isn't art maybe also a catalyst, the catalyst of change? Aren't the writers, the poets, the activists who write things, aren't those the people that basically start a revolution and make change in history? So, yeah.
And Richard, I didn't mean to undermine it. What my point, I think I'm agreeing with you. My point was that we don't know what to do with art because it speaks to us so viscerally.
Right.
Those movies you saw about New York didn't hit you over the head and say, go to New York, right? Like instruction manual. It came from your soul. It came from somewhere else. It wasn't your psyche, right? Absolutely. Quitting your job, intellectually quitting your job, wrong thing to do. Emotionally makes total sense.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think there's also an interesting thing that I've kind of observed through having lived in another country prior to moving to the States, is that going back to Casey's point, and Casey, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think parts of what I've heard is that there's a lack of understanding of what art even is to begin with. That's why I think it leads to a lack of appreciation, and that's why Richard sometimes has to transition professions from being an artist to a tour guide. In some
I'm
situations.
Not a tour guide, by the way. I'm not a tour guide. Let me be clear about that.
But one of the things that it made me think of was I think that lack of understanding as far as what makes something art, it does serve a purpose. And here's how I understood that. When I think about certain historical things that have happened in, let's say, the country of Russia, for example, back when Pushkin, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, all of them alive, they expressed a lot of the ideology through their artwork, through the writing, that you literally had to read between the lines to understand what was the hidden message with a character who, quote unquote, loses his nose and goes through the streets, can't find certain things. And so there's a lot of beauty in that particular art form, where it's not one of those where you pick up the book and it tells you off the bat that, hey, we're starting a revolution against the government, but we're going to do it through our writing.
Nice.
And so that's where I kind of looked at that, is that even though in today's day and age, I completely agree with the two of you that there's probably a lack of understanding. In fact, I'll admit it. I experience a lack of understanding when it comes to certain artwork or certain just work in general. But I think that there is also a huge upside to that. And that is, in history, moments like that served us as people, because it gave people an opportunity to read between the lines, to make their own decisions, and in a way, I'm not going to say stay ahead of the game, but more so be able to make the best possible decisions to actually progress, rather than, being stuck in that moment. And
I think you just and I think you just answered the question why Danielle Steele likely is an art. And that is, I think there's two things. One is in the medium and the expression.
Mm-hmm.
If something is so direct and formulaic, part of the beauty of life is the hidden, is the surprise.
Yeah.
And you say, oh my God, I have to reread that paragraph again. I did not see that in Tolstoy or somewhere. You need to read there's all these books written about a book, an interpretation of it. So there's that element where Danielle Steele, you're like, okay, like it is what it is. Like there's nothing's hidden there. And that's the beauty that you see in religion and art and writing and elsewhere, is when it's not as brazenly direct. I think the second point is not only how it's delivered, but the impact. No one is really going to, besides maybe some convention, no one is going to be moved for positive change, no offense to Danielle Steele listeners, based on a Danielle Steele book in the same way, or the courage of it in the same way you are with those commentators in Russia at the time, many of them who might have risked their lives. Now, Danielle Steele, there may be art, she might have done it, a female writer, liberation of female, you can interpret it that way. And if that's the case, I don't know enough about Danielle Steele, you may look at her books as an artistic medium, and maybe it isn't as direct, maybe it is more nuanced than I'm giving it credit. So, but if Danielle Steele does deliver this and write it in a surprising, challenging, nuanced way, and makes you work, if the impact of it could be inspirational and aspirational and even freedom giving for a certain population, why not call Danielle Steele art, right? So I think your Oleg and your comment, we're starting to suss out what could be the pillars or the qualities of what makes art.
Can I say something, Scott?
Oh, please.
It's a really nice point what you said, Oleg, because I had some friends from Armenia visiting me, and they were looking at my carpet, and they were saying, "Is that Armenian carpet?" And I said, "No, it's actually Turkish." And then he said, because in Armenia the carpets were used to relay messages, like Oleg is actually mentioning. So in symbols, which is like I never heard of anything like that. Although, Oleg, I do love some brutalist art that your former government, the Russian communistic, I love the communistic posters. They're like,
they're right in your face.
I love that.
That hand is right there. You're not missing that one.
I love the in your face, the Nazi propaganda. I know it's not okay. It's not very I got to be careful using my words right now, but I do really
I'm
appreciate.
the Jewish guy on the show. You're good. You go right ahead. You're fine.
But Triumph des Willens, that's the famous Olympic movie that was made in the late 30s, where a female movie maker actually like made a documentary about the Olympics. The imagery was like groundbreaking, the way that she like portrayed the Nazi regime and the way like the processions, the speeches, it was visually stunning. And it's still that stuff. I actually like photographed Stanley. He is a philosopher who lives in New Haven. He is studied on like totalitarian regimes, and I photographed him basically with that documentary in mind, you know, like from low perspective, making people bigger than life. That's what they did in all those Nazistic and communistic regimes. So even the brutalist stuff, I consider art that I appreciate.
Well, you know, and Scott, sorry to keep
You
putting
aren't being very artful about this.
keep putting you on hold here, but
Scott hasn't talked in 8 minutes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is coming after y'all a type of art? I'm going to if it is.
Back to Richard's comment, one of the things that I actually recall about living in Russia was that the rugs that you mentioned, as far as having its own form of language or communication, back in the town that I was from, it wasn't always the rug wasn't always on the floor. Sometimes there was a rug form that covered the couch. Sometimes there was a rug form that covered the walls, just to, I think, amplify some of these messages even more. And that's where I found fascinating how even in those particular forms, there was a hidden message. There was that message that you literally had to read between the lines because it was covered with all of these other symbols to divert attention. So you're not looking directly at there. I mean, plenty of movies, plenty of TV shows do this very well right now, where they'll have the main characters be covered in tattoos or whatever it is, and really there's the tattoo is just giant map of how to get out of a prison, or like all these like prison break moments. Yeah, but like the whole body is covered with all of these other things to divert attention. So I find that fascinating, how to one person, kind of how we started this conversation, to one person that could literally mean everything that they need to know about the particular art form. To someone else, it could just be, what is this?
Right.
Well, let's talk about this, though, for a minute, because it raises an interesting question, which goes back to something Richard said earlier about good art versus bad art. Now, art that I do is by definition bad. But art that might be a little bit more elevated, what I'm hearing you all talk about, particularly sort of thinking through this Danielle Steele example, Danielle Steele, and I'll include, at risk of my own head, Stephen King in this category, and some other authors too.
Totally going down after this.
V.C. Andrews, by the way, is one that's notorious. You read it once and you exhaust all of the possibilities. Whereas Toni Morrison, or my favorite author, the incredible Gene Wolfe, you can read these books 15, 20 times. You can read it 10 times just to appreciate the language, but getting beneath the text and the story to get and understand the message, the themes, the hidden directions, or the philosophical points, or the worldview that's embedded within the artist is a different matter altogether. And so let's assume for now that Danielle Steele is art. But it's art without subtext. Whereas Toni Morrison is art with subtext up the wazoo. And so does great art inherently have subtext?
No.
Why?
No, it's very it's very interesting, Scott, that you mentioned that, because again, now you're like so basically, if I listen to what you are saying, if I as an artist think long enough to put something in what I am making, then that should be then of a higher value than than the penny novel writer who, like, writes a love, like so. I don't think so. For me, because the subtext can only be read if you have a certain story yourself and you connect with that content. And so for me, like Casey also like pointed out, it's about the connection that art makes. It's about basically, if somebody makes a painting of like a nature landscape, you can write essays about a painting of a nature landscape, like what's behind it, what we see in it. When it's winter, it's like how we see winter, and like we use it in metaphors. But maybe it's just a painting of a landscape. However, it's the story that we bring when we stand in front of that piece of art, how we connect with it. Maybe my father used to have a big I'm just making something up, but maybe we used to have land, and that I connect with that. I used to play with it, or whatever emotional connection you make. Or maybe it's just beautiful. Maybe it just strikes you as something that is like striking. That's enough for me to make it art. Whether it's Stephen King, I do like the movies that is made from his work. Not so I tried to read his books. I couldn't get into all these personages that were being killed off few pages later, so I didn't want to invest in all that. But I love Clive Barker, which you probably might also be thinking like, oh my God, that's totally awful. But no,
that's art, man. That is art.
Some people will say that's ugly art. So yeah, it all depends on the story that you bring with it while you're connecting with it. For me, that is the most important thing. It's not so much about the label. I tried to say that earlier. Why is something art? When is something art? Let's talk about it, that it's a fact, that it's here, and what is the value of it. I think that's a more valuable discussion about what can we do with it, with the art. Like Casey's saying, is how we basically now perceiving art. Although I do love concrete a lot instead of grass, I still love the discussion about, okay, when is it valuable to us? What does it do? How can we learn from it? How can we get better people from it? Or
I'm gonna just interject here. Melody had a very simple response to the question, and it was in agreement with you, Richard. She simply said no. Thank you for that, Melody. I'm glad you all are best friends now. And then Arjun, thank you for joining us tonight. I don't believe we've had you on the show before, but it is so good to have you here. And I throw this out here as an interesting and really beautifully put comment, and that itself has a component of artfulness to it. So thank you for that, Arjun. Now, I'm going to ask a question, because maybe Arjun, just judging from his name, but I could be wrong about this, but I know you definitely, Richard, are from the Netherlands. I'm going to pick on one of your Dutch national heroes here. My favorite artist, at least one of my favorite.
Show is definitely going down.
It's going down, brother. Richard, I'm going to make sure our friendship is over by the time this night.
Sellers, nationals.
So, one of my favorite musical artists of all time is someone from Amsterdam named Armin van Buuren. And Armin, innovative, creative, electronic music artist, brilliant, good, the whole package, everything Scott Mason could want. But then I found out, and this goes back to something Melody mentioned earlier, that he basically works with ghost producers. He doesn't do any of that. And that, yes, you know him, Arjun. I love Armin van Buuren. I love him. But I will say, when I found out these were all ghost producers, and some of them were ghost writers too, that he's under contract with, apparently, the story I heard. I don't want to say I know this for a fact. I don't want any defamation lawsuits. I'm just saying I heard this, okay? Not saying anything on you, Armin. You're a lot richer than me. But I heard that basically that these things are all basically contract jobs under his name. And I was a little bit, his art went down a little bit. I had to switch my allegiances to a couple of other Dutch geniuses, Paul van Dyck or people like that. What do y'all think about that? You mentioned Koons earlier, Richard?
Yes, exactly. That's basically. It's interesting because sometimes. Okay, so nowadays I sell my street photography a lot. And my street photography all looks very candid. My book, if you flip through my book, it's all like daily images. But I do have to be honest. Sometimes I in a scenery on the street, I see something happen, and I just missed it. But I make a connection with the person. I'm like, can you do that again for me for the picture? And then I make a picture, and I basically, can you like do that movement one more time? Or I asked the surfer. Actually, it's in my book. There's a surfer on the subway. He has this surfboard, and he's standing in the middle of a subway car. And I thought that was such a great scene to like have a surfboard in a New York City subway car. But actually, the guy was sitting down, and he was like being busy with something else. And I asked him, "Can you just stand up?" And like so, basically, I positioned the picture, but it looked as if I just caught him standing there. And I know that some people's they like are like, "Oh my God, what an amazing picture that you walked into that you." So I noticed that people start to like imagine things while they are looking at my work, and I'm like thinking, I basically set this up, but this is not like a real like candid photograph. So I'm not saying anything when people are saying that. I'm not like I will not, I will not burst their bubble. And then I'm also thinking, this is great. I have the power basically to evoke a story in somebody's head. Somebody connects with it, creates what that person sees in his own head, and makes a connection with my work. And I think that's all it needs to do. For me, it's not really important if I created that situation. So it should not be actually of importance if Armin van Buuren has some other writers. He probably like manages it, and he says yay and nay, and then it goes out. You enjoy it. I hope you still enjoy it, and only because
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
so it's about that. It's about the connection you make with the music, not so much with the name that is connected with it that produced it. That's my
I just
think
want to quickly, very quickly, if I could, Oleg, because we have a participant who wanted to have his art exposed a little bit via the show. If you could just scroll up Arjun's information about himself, so we can have folks support him here and thank him for being here. Oleg, that was all I wanted to say. Go back and finish what you were saying before I so crassly came in here and interrupted you.
Yeah, so I'm going to challenge you there, Scott, and no, I'm kidding. Build off of what Richard had said. I think that labels such as ghostwriters get a bad rep, and here's why. For me, the question that I try and explore, and that is, at what point does an artist not become an artist anymore? Ghostwriters, based on my own personal experience and having seen other people utilize them for a variety of reasons, if the goal is to produce a book that is going to be going to whatever place or providing whatever value, then for me, I guess the question is, outside of just the moral decision-making process that I have to go through, why does it matter what process it goes through? Now, I'm not saying that unethically producing whatever it is that I'm trying to produce, but I'm saying utilizing resources at hand in order to be able to communicate the idea. For example, if I have the idea for whatever the book or whatever the piece of work that I'm trying to do, but yet the challenge that I'm experiencing personally is having the lack of time due to other projects, other obligations and responsibilities, then in using a service like that, I think I'm still being an artist, so to speak, because I'm still having to communicate the original idea and the process of it all. But that's something that I just wanted to add on to it. I think that particular title doesn't get the best possible name. That's just my opinion of it. And I don't think that there is at least from my perspective, I don't think there is a fine line between, okay, just because you stop halfway through the process or a quarter of the way, you're no longer an artist.
I've just got to interject here. First of all,
Yes.
Arjun, your lengthy comment. I love that you said that personally, because my mantra, what I stand for, is a movement for connecting people through the search for meaning. I agree with you. If there's no connection through a search for meaning, or if there's no meaning drive that we have in our life, ultimately we're not connected as a species. We are a herd species, and that destroys us. I just wanted to make a side comment there. But Oleg, I wanted to, though, talk to you, and all of us except you, Oleg.
Mhm.
And I will hold this against you, and I always have held it against you. I'm never going to forgive or forget what I'm
That's
about
all
to
right.
say about you.
It's your journey to go on. Don't worry about it.
Which is that Richard and Casey surely know of a time when there was a grand artistic battle happening, at least here in the US. I don't think it happened in Europe, actually, which is that rock was supposed to be better than disco, and disco was bad. Disco got trashed and got banished off the radio for a while, although it didn't really go away, but people called it something else. And it had no legitimacy. And it's only been in the past however many years that it's had a resurgence as a legitimate art form, and it's been reassessed critically and by the public. The reason why I mention that is because one of the big critiques about disco was that it was inauthentic. Whereas these men standing up here with guitars, they're usually white men, standing up there with guitars, pouring their hearts and souls out with natural instruments, were authentic. They were being real. The Bee Gees, no one claimed were authentic. They were plastic as can be. And so disco was viewed as an inferior art form due to the lack of authenticity. Why do I mention that now? Because, Oleg, one could push back and say that the model, the ghostwriter model, or the Armin van Buuren model, if that's true about Armin van Buuren, is one in which there's no authenticity. You might enjoy it, but you are enjoying plastic. Casey, you've been quiet a long time now. Get up here and say something.
So
stand up.
And if you don't disagree, I will, Casey. You're in good hands.
I don't know how getting support in writing something is inauthentic or is plastic. When you're going with disco, I think it was a racial thing. White people like rock, black people, African Americans like disco, and then in the early 80s when hip hop came out and hip hop started, late 70s. So I think the inauthenticity and the plasticness of disco for me was more racial. I don't think people would admit it, but that's what I remember. And I think the reason disco is making a resurgence is because all the people who called it inauthentic then are 30 years older and have some nostalgia for the 70s and are a lot, hopefully a lot softer now. I think this whole thing so we're getting some definitions of art, right? We're getting that there's a nuance, there's subtlety that needs to be. It can't just be direct and in your face. It has to be surprise in a way. There has to be a secret code, like the Armenian Carpets or Tolstoy. I think there's an element that art needs to move you. We know it's communication. Everyone will agree that, but that needs to move you, needs to inspire you, whether it's the Nazis, whether it's a revolution, whatever it is, need to inspire you. I think also we're finding what it's not, in that one of it is that it can't be scalable. It has to be authentic. It has to be the original. It has to be hand signed by the author. Otherwise, if it's a picture of it, if it's a copy of it, it just wasn't the original. Now we're moving away from the actual piece itself and the expression, and now we're defining art by some metric, some catalog of qualifications around its production. The printing press was invented in the 1430s or 1440s. I mean, before that, everything was made by the author, right? You couldn't make duplicates of it. So I don't know why we're penalizing artists now just because technology, duplication technology, is better 500 years later. I mean, why, if something is artistic, why is this picture of Miles Davis any less than the original album cover that's sitting? So who knows where it is, or the original picture? So the actual stock copy. Why is that? But I'm seeing that whether we like it or not, I think there's some ephemeral and intangible, and also some real tangible descriptions we have as to what makes something art. And I think the fact that it has to directly come from the horse's mouth, from the author, and that the author can't have any help in doing it, seem to be the definitions, whether we know it or not, that we use to define art, as unfair or irrational as it may be.
Unless the reproduction is part of the concept of being unless that is part of the art, like an Andy Warhol, a Keith Haring, the pop shop of Keith Haring. Keith Haring was all about basically making it for the masses. That was
Right.
that was part of his whole spiel. Was like, as many Andy Warhol too. Whatever you put in front of him, he would sign. Everything could be like, it's so. I'd rather, like, for me, I still have difficulty, guys, with like trying to label art. I still have difficulty with it. So for me, art is truth. That's it. And whatever your truth is, especially now in this crazy media landscape that we're living in, we all live with different truths. And that's the same with art. That's why, for me, it's truth. It's truth and connecting. Those are the only two things. Art for me is the peacemaker. It's like, it's the same thing when you walk into a bar. The first thing you try, art is tribal. Art basically, art is a friend. That's the right word. Stephen Frey mentioned that in one of the podcasts that I listened to. Because why it's a friend? It's like the same thing as when you walk into a bar, you try to find your tribe. You talk about sports. You try to find who you can connect with, who you can root for. Basically, it creates your safety environment. That's how you find your allies. And so the same with art. It's like art is a friend. I totally believe that, because art doesn't have borders. So it's the only thing, like the Olympic Games, that connect nations with each other. And so for me, those are, so they're all like meta definitions of what I consider art. But I don't, for me, it's not, like you talk about the nuance, I don't agree with it. Like, I love the art that's like flat in my face and that gives me the horrors. So the nuance is, for me, not part of a definition, because everything can be part of that definition when it comes to art.
My only point is, I think there are traditional definitions of art, some of which I listed, that there are certain elements, whether it's nuance or movement or authenticity. And I'm with you. I'm challenging that to say that I think those are 15th century, 19th century definitions that we're bringing now. And I think we need to put them under a microscope to see if that still matters. Obviously, with Andy Warhol, the non-scalability of art, he threw that rule out the window. That didn't apply to him anymore. So that's my point. I think to Scott, to your point of whether something is plastic or whether that artist who has people working for him, I think subconsciously we define art as the artist has to do it. And art can't be done if there's help by a team. But why is that?
Well, I think the one thing I'll add, and Richard, I appreciate you saying a positive remark about another platform. So at least, that might help this show to continue airing, considering Scott's comments against Stephen King and everyone else that he's
trashing
not
today.
on the good side of it all. But I think there is something to what Casey just mentioned, and that's understanding that just because I'm choosing to utilize the concept of teamwork, it doesn't make it any less authentic. Who's to say that the only way to preserve its authenticity has to be done from start to finish, from ideation to the final product? I think, if anything, what I'm choosing to take away from Casey's remark, it's that we live in in my opinion, we live in a beautiful time with access to resources that we didn't have We didn't have many of these resources prior to 2004, 2005. Facebook wasn't a thing. Richard couldn't do what he's able to do today with the same purpose and the same meaning and the same way of he's trying to communicate the ideas prior to a platform. Now, not to say that there were other platforms to do it, but
I'd be a painter, but a very frustrated one.
it created additional avenues. But the other thing that I'll mention that I wanted to say is, and this is more so just a curiosity question for the four of us as well as anyone else that's participating in the comments. How many originals do you think there are in museums or wherever it is, and how many do you think are replicas?
You know what is interesting? You know Hokusai's The Wave, the famous Japanese woodblock print of The Wave. There is actually a YouTube channel. I think his name is David Bull. David Bull. He's a Canadian woodblock printer. He has this fabulous obsession. He lives in Japan, and he's a woodblock printer. He has this obsessiveness of creating woodblock prints, and he has, like, I think 17 parts of his path of recreating the wave. And he said basically the wave was from Hokusai. Basically Hokusai sketched the wave, but the real wave was printed by printers. The craft was done by the people who were like in his stable that would create the prints. Actually, he was not the maker of any of those prints. He was, and that's like, you know, one of the famous Japanese art pieces. I want to go back to what Scott said about disco, how it was vilified or, like, you know, not being authentic enough.
Yeah, and Melody's right, by the way, the Bee Gees are incredible.
So, but there's so many art streams, whether it's like the Impressionists, whether it's like the nudity that came up after the medieval times. There is like so many art streamings, so many art expressions have been vilified by the media, by the general public. Like Van Gogh, he never made a dime during his life because of that. Many artists don't do and are being appreciated after they pass away. So the fact that it's not appreciated or vilified by the general public doesn't say anything about the value of the art in the longer, you know, stretch of time in history.
Richard, you are an original. I will also say that very much about Casey and Oleg, which is why I feel so proud every week coming into this show. I'll also say one final thing, which is that this show is significantly longer than the average podcast. But this conversation tonight explains why that time is worth it. We really didn't hit our stride. We had great conversation right off the bat, I'll say. But this really gathered steam as it went along. It was extraordinary. And that's what happens when extraordinary minds come together. There are so many things in the comments that we didn't even have a chance to address, and we can go on for another 2 or 3 hours about them. Thank you, Arjun, Melody, Michelle, everyone else who popped in and who might or might not have said anything at all. It was amazing. Let's spend a few minutes, if we may, talking about ourselves here. Oleg, what sort of art might be you putting out in the world twice a week?
Well, so first remark that I'll say is that I appreciate the fact that you mentioned all of us as originals. It would be a little bit disheartening to, I guess, look at it as if we were talking to replicas of one another. So I'm glad that
we're all part of a process,
real, and we're all able to share the space. But for me, there are two spaces where I'm able to create different types of art. Much of that art revolves around helping myself as well as helping other people create the story that they ultimately can live. And I think part of that narrative involves everything that we discussed about today, challenging limitations, assumptions. Who's to say that it has to be defined in X, Y, and Z way? Why can it be other things? So the two spaces that I'll share that people can participate in is one called Overcoming Odds, and the other one is called The Power of Your Story. And in fact, tomorrow's episode that the three of us will be a part of, which will be discussing about how do you use your voice. That is very much relevant to the conversation that we had today. Voice, I believe, is also an art form. Not even necessarily if used in a particular way. I think just used the way it is. Voice is an example of so many things that may or may not be able to communicated or be communicated through written or spoken. So I find that beautiful, and I also have similar words about this space. I think the fact that we're able to come together and have varying opinions, but still continue the conversation and still get deeper into some of these topics that I don't think get the proper attention or the proper space to be able to have a deeper conversation around.
Casey, you, I'm sure, have met many artists besides Richard that came from or were expressing themselves in ways that were unsatisfactory. Talk to us a little bit about that and what else you are doing and where folks can find you.
Yeah, every lawyer wants to be a novelist or an author or an author, an artist in some way. And I'm a former attorney myself. There's a few other ones on this. And so you can find me at leavelawbehind.com. I've created a community and an actual course, think masterclass, for lawyers, full program. We've helped over 100 lawyers, unhappy lawyers, leave the law for alternative careers. And we have a full class, 252 people in it right now, making their way out to a dream career out of the law. So that's where you can find me.
And
Man,
Richard,
I feel left out.
I know. Well, don't worry.
In the room.
You have plenty of time to go and then develop your own unique hatred of it. Richard, you are a resounding ex-lawyer success story.
I left law behind, but I still need to draft contracts. Damn it. Yeah.
Oleg, where can we find out more about Richard? And Richard, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what's going on with you and where folks can get more information about your book or anything else that they want to know if they've been as intrigued by you as we were.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me. It was really wonderful. Internet can be an ugly place, but this place was very beautiful. I have on Instagram. You can find my latest work. That's my street photography, and my street photography is going to be in a second edition for my book, New York, New York. Look, nice font. So where there's only photography in this book, and my COVID project was postcards from NYC.com. And basically, I have been creating postcards, and it's just wonderful. People are not allowed to enter the United States at the moment. So I created this project like, I sent you New York in your mailbox. And so basically, I have created postcards that I mail out to people on my Patreon. And it's just wonderful. People connect with the city by seeing a piece of New York City in their mailbox. And I do this every month. And it's just great. It's a great way for me to keep myself connected with the city. And it's a great way for people to connect with the city as well without visiting it. Postcards from NYC.com.
Thank you. The pandemic has brought about so much creativity. This show itself was a product of the pandemic. Your art that you just spoke about, Richard, our connection, Casey, Oleg, and I with each other was because of the pandemic, and Melody we would never have known but for the pandemic. I love you. Oh, and Oleg, please put Melody's website up on the scroll, please. Thank you, Melody. And you should not hesitate to insert that in the comments in the future too. We want to support you as a fan of this show. We loved hearing about your favorite artist as well, Thomas Kincaid. Thank you for that. Again, we would never have known about you but for the pandemic and the creativity that emerged because of it. I'm Scott Mason. My website is purposehighway.com, and it features my podcast, Scott Mason's Purpose Highway, which deals with people who are searching for connection to each other via finding pathways for meaning. We are living in a time of a silent revolution of thought where the institutions that have historically connected people through the search for ethics, purpose, and spirituality are in decline. What comes in their place? Find out on purposehighway.com. This week's guest actually was Casey, and we have a future guest in the house right on Richard's lap. Richard, why don't you introduce our very, very special guest tonight?
This is fast.
Oh, you're muted.
This is my new purpose, Skylar. And
Wow.
there's a daily highway. But she's doing great.
Thank you for introducing us to her.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you
Everyone,
for having me.
Thank you. And everyone who was watching tonight, if you enjoyed the show, be sure to leave us a review on Facebook, by the way, or on LinkedIn. We have a homepage there. One other thing, too. I actually agree, despite my argumentations to the contrary today, that art can come in all sorts of places. I used to own a t-shirt printing company.
You came full circle.
Yeah. And that's how I got to know Richard. However, there is a very special t-shirt printing company that is the sponsor of this show. Its name is Spectrum Designs. It does great embroidery work for your t-shirts. It does great printing work for your t-shirts. And it almost exclusively employs people on the autistic spectrum. It does great work. I'll say that again. I'll say it again. And I'll say it again. It is art. Oleg, maybe you can show the folks a little bit about Spectrum.
That is art right there.
Yes.
I'm glad we're able to do this. And I just, once again, before we leave and conclude today's show, I just want to thank the three of you for being a part of it and really helping me expand my own perspective on what art looks like, and just very enriching conversation and a lot of perspectives that were shattered and shifted and changed. So just, I want to thank the three of you for doing that.
I have huge gratitude too. I was thinking at different points during this. This was really, in my mind, a major shifting of some of the lenses through which I view the world. And that was really amazing.